Samantha?
I am.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lymphoma Canada's Nutrition webinar. My name is Tracy Ann Curtis. I'm the Regional Manager for Quebec, and I'm delighted to introduce you today to Samantha Thiessen, who will be presenting this webinar for us. Samantha is a registered dietitian with over 10 years experience in the areas of clinical nutrition and nutrition communication. She's currently working in the area of cardiac rehabilitation and teaches overseas trained dietitians at Ryerson University. She's lived and worked around the world, including Australia, Singapore, and of course, Canada. Her proudest achievements is the recent publication of a baby cookbook for new parents, and she also writes a blog entitled Nutrition Detectives. And her love and passion for nutrition come from helping others learn more about the often complicated topics of nutritional science. So without further ado, and with that lovely pedigree behind her, Samantha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm really very excited to be presenting Lymphoma Canada's first webinar, and I thought it seemed pretty appropriate that we start talking about nutrition, because just about everyone I meet from all walks of life, you ask a question. Any party I go to, I usually get a question. What do you do? Oh, I have a question for you about healthy eating. So I'm hoping today that we can talk a little about healthy eating, and then we'll take a little bit of a turn, and we're going to also address nutrition as it relates to symptom management. So if you're currently actively undergoing treatment, a little bit of a different take on nutrition, but also I think really useful. So we'll keep moving here. So let's get started. I think a lot of you probably realize I don't need to give you an overview of lymphoma. We know that cancer is a multi-step process where cells change. They're affected by a number of different factors like genetics and exposure to certain environments, but all nutritional factors. And so the role of nutrition really spans the whole gamut of prevention, treatment, and survivorship when we talk about cancer. But when we talk about active cancer as it relates to nutrition, the number one goal is primarily to prevent malnutrition. Know that if you're malnourished, there's a decreased responsiveness or tolerance to treatment if you're currently undergoing treatment. It affects the quality of life. So it affects your ability to do things that maybe you once were able to do and aren't able to do now. And it impacts mortality, right? So we know that across all kinds of disease processes, nutrition plays a big role. But the fact is that nutrition and cancer is a complex, multifaceted relationship. Moving here. So what was complex? Scientists are taking a look at a broader approach to nutritional science and disease. That is, they're looking at combinations of foods versus individual components. So, for example, the focus seems to be more on colorful fruits and vegetables instead of just beta-carotene, for example. If we look at beta-carotene, and when it first kind of got really big and popular in the 1990s, people rushed to buy beta-carotene supplements because it was the new, potent, powerful antioxidant, the cure-all for everything. But later research found that people who took beta-carotene supplements actually put themselves at higher risk for lung cancer. So what is that? So it begs the question to me, as people who ate foods that were high in beta-carotene, like squash, pumpkin, carrots, things like that, did they have the same risks for lung cancer? Well, there's no evidence to say they did or they didn't, but I would say that it's looking more at individual, instead of looking at individual parts of food, we're looking at what I call kind of the whole food. So eating well is about balance, it's about knowledge and planning. And my favorite things is showing my little part, as you can see here. And you can see my pie chart. People who eat healthy, balanced meal takes up a small part of my pie chart, but the rest of the people who really this pie chart really wish it was pie. It's really telling in that, eating well isn't necessarily coming naturally to most of us. So it's also, what I say, it's about finding a balance for you. And that may depend on what you're looking for. Now, eating well, as I see it comes in large part from a resource that we have in Canada called Canada's Food Guide. And Canada's Food Guide is probably, if I go back to, grade 2 health class, you probably will remember this rainbow in some kind of way. So I'll refresh your memory a little bit about what kind of makes up the basics of Canada's Food Guide. Now, 4 main food groups make up the food guide. We've got vegetables and fruit, grain products, alternatives, and meat and alternatives. Now, let's take a look at each of these just in a tiny little bit more detail here. Now, if we look at vegetables and fruit, we know that we focus on choosing vegetables and fruit that don't have a lot of extra fat, sugar, or salt necessarily to it. We know that most vegetables and fruit are naturally low in fat and calories, but they become high sources of fat when they're breaded, when they're fried, or served with butter or cream-based sauces. So ideally, we want to look at steamed, baked, stir-fried instead of deep-fried more often. When it comes to fruit, we want to sort of enjoy pieces of fruit more often than fruit juice. And I always say to people, think of fruit juice as a food. We don't sometimes think of it that way because when you down a glass of juice, it kind of disappears really quickly. But it counts. You don't want to forget that. We all know that getting a lot of vegetables and fruit have a lot of potential disease-fighting antioxidants. Although exactly how antioxidants work in disease processes is still a bit of a mystery. And so we can't say with absolute certainty that, antioxidants are sort of the new thing when it comes to cancer prevention because we really don't have that much evidence to support specific recommendations when it comes to that. And the other part when it comes to vegetables and juices specifically is if you're going to include vegetable juice, it's just to watch the really high sodium containing ones. You can't find low sodium versions, and so those are ones that you might want to take a look at when you're grocery shopping. With juices, I usually say if you're going to have fruit juice, it should be 100% fruit juice. And that means that those brands that sort of say, that they're typically marketed to kids, but that say, contain 10% juice really means they're primarily water and sugar. So you probably don't want to have too much of that too often. When grain products, what we want to do is we want to look at whole grain versions more often, but really like the word whole grain because I prefer almost to say high fiber grains more often because not all whole grains are high fiber. We know fiber plays a really important role in satiety, in disease prevention, in a lot of sort of benefits for diabetes and cardiovascular disease specifically, but we've also seen that can be quite helpful for general health. So think of whole grain tortilla chips. You have the whole corn grain, but it's not necessarily high in fiber. Eating fiber helps you get enough of your daily fiber, but in other interesting and important minerals like, say, magnesium, for example. So whole grains might include things like barley, oats, brown rice, and wild rice. And so we want to choose grain products that are typically lower in fat, sugar, and salt. So unfortunately, the drive-through muffin at your local coffee shop that will remain nameless isn't usually necessarily a super healthy choice. Muffins have what we call the sort of health halo around them, right? So people think of muffins as super healthy. Same thing with bagels, but you get a drive-through bagel and you can do almost 400 calories, and that's with nothing on it. So to consider that, and then you get a typical coffee shop chocolate chip muffin, which is really like a mini cake as I see it, and I mean they run you almost 400 calories as well. So you have to be consider those types of things as well. If you're really keen, you can think about adding oat bran, ground flaxseed. You can buy psyllium at bulk stores. You can add them to your cereal, to baking, to yogurt, to desserts. I usually tell my patients that if their favorite cereal in the whole wide world is cornflakes or Rice Krispies or something equally low in fiber, that you can actually add either a higher fiber cereal to mix with it or something like adding some of these seeds or grains to make it a little bit higher in fiber. And then that way you feel like you don't have to give anything up. alternatives, I mean, we want to look at lower fat dairy products generally more often. So that might be skim milk, 1% milk, 2% milk, or fortified soy milk each day. I do want to sort of say alternative milks like rice milk and almond milk, you have to be a little bit careful because they're generally not fortified. You can check the label to see if they're fortified, but generally that means they're not comparable to these other milks in terms of calcium and vitamin D levels. So that's where label reading becomes your friend. So look for the word fortified on the package, or you can look at the nutrition facts table on the side panel, and that can help you determine what you're looking at. In terms of yogurt and cottage cheese, anything between about 0 to 2% milk fat is considered a low-fat choice, so that's fine. Low cheese is considered anything between 15 to 20% milk fat or less. You can see that right on the front of most brick cheeses. If it's made from some kind of animal fat, so goat milk or sheep's milk or cow's milk, it have a milk fat percentage on the front. And the percentage you usually see is moisture, so you don't have to worry so much about that. But if you look at the front of it, you'll see MF, and that means milk fat. So you can look at the percent milk fat on your cheese and see what you have in your fridge. Then we have yogurt, frozen yogurt, and ice cream. It's generally about moderation, really. I mean, that's not a very hard and fast recommendation, clearly. There's no specifics there. But it's really about looking at, how much do you want to eat? If you have more than a couple of golf ball size servings, then you probably don't want to have it as often in the week, say, for example. And alternatives. The idea here is when it comes to meat consumption, I mean, times have changed. I mean, many of us grew up in households where meat took the center stage on the dinner plate. And so today, a balanced meal includes meat alternatives or maybe smaller amounts of meat. But we want to emphasize lean cuts of meat and skinless poultry. Instead of frying or deep frying meat, consider baking, broiling, poach, roast, or even barbecuing, and that allows a lot of the fat to drip off. And so something to consider when looking at, look for lean cuts of meat, so less marbling, maybe trimming some of the visible fat on the outside. When it comes to processed meats, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Light meats or processed meats or deli meat, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we typically say look for lower sodium, lower fat versions. So roast chicken, roast turkey, lean hams. You can also find nitrite-free versions. And generally, we say, the recommendation from the World Cancer Research Fund summary report, which came out, it was a number of years ago now, but they suggested that we look at avoiding processed meats, that you don't probably want to eat them on a day-to-day basis, but you can certainly still include them in small amounts, and it's probably okay. In fact, if you look at some of the FDA websites, they talk about, nitrites amounts can be potentially unhealthy for all of us, but we also want to consider that we get nitrates and nitrites from other sources. In fact, you'll see them a lot used in fertilizer, right? So you might actually get them from eating vegetables. But clearly, we know benefits to eating vegetables are much, much higher than getting a small amount of nitrates or nitrites. So if you include processed meats, you probably want to just limit how often you have them. Now, the 2 servings of fish a week is something that I certainly talk to cardiac patients about at great length, because we know that the omega-3 fatty acids found in them are really beneficial for the heart. But the interesting thing is more and more research is being done, and it's been shown to offer a lot more benefits than we realized across a bunch of other disease process states. So there is some potential, and really what we know is that if you look at the fat profile of fish compared with, say, something like red meat, it's considerably lower in saturated fat than red meat. So we do recommend at least 2 servings of fish a week, and that would be fresh, frozen, or canned fish. And a serving is about the size of the palm of your hand or a deck of cards, if you're sure. So having a tuna sandwich one day for lunch, and then potentially, baking a piece of fish in the oven for dinner another night, I mean, that's a pretty simple way of including things like that. know that meat alternatives like dried beans and lentils, as well as tofu more often, also gives you the benefit of soluble fiber. Now, fiber is also obviously important, and it helps lower your saturated fat intake and then ups your fiber intake. So it gives you that feeling of fullness where meat has no fiber. So something to consider. I mean, I've had people say to me, "Oh, you know, beans, I can't stomach them." And I said, well, probably if you didn't grow up with beans, something to consider would be finding recipes that have a lot of other ingredients where the beans would get mixed together. That is, the beans wouldn't be the focal point of your meal. It's not like you're sitting down to a great big old plate of beans. You're maybe looking at in a soup or a stew or maybe in a salad. And start with ones that you like, maybe even starting with like a hummus dip is the introduction would be another way to do it. So eggs are so-called much maligned food. You know, they get a bit of a bad reputation in the press, but the link between the high amount of cholesterol that probably a lot of you know eggs contain and maybe our cholesterol levels in our blood is a really weak link. And so it's actually not so much high cholesterol foods that are bad for us that make our cholesterol higher, make us less healthy. It's actually probably saturated fat in our diet. So that would be things like red meat or chicken wings or cream and things like that that have a lot of those animal fats that have a big impact on our health than, say, eggs. Eggs really are very low in saturated fat, and then they have other really important nutrients, like they're a great source of protein, and they also have a lot of other nutrients that we probably want to include more of. So include eggs monthly is a great way. I call it one of those versatile foods. You can have them at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's kind of easy, and so if you're in a rush or anything like that, it's kind of a quick, easy food to include. And I'm getting any kickbacks from the egg farmers, so we're clear. Okay. If we go inside the food guide, it gets a little bit more wordy, and I know this is hard to read, and I intended it that way, that you don't need to know all of this stuff, and there are panels inside that talk about how many servings you need based on your age, based on your gender, and that's fine. If that's something you're interested in, you could certainly look at that more closely. If this was, you know, face-to-face, I'd probably give you a copy myself, like, to look at. But I really think that the focus is maybe more on the outer page that we looked at, sort of the big rainbow. And what I actually like to look at and focus on more is this. And this is what we call the healthy plate. The healthy plate is a really nice visual of how you can make sure you're getting a nice variety among all those food groups, but then you're getting the right proportions of them as well. Now, most of the time I say to people, I say, don't expect your plate to look precisely like this very evening. But I do think that at lunch and supper, you want to try to aim as close as you can to this. So I want you to imagine a line down the middle of your plate. And most of that plate should be vegetables. It doesn't have to be a heaping mountain of vegetables, but we're talking about, you know, a fistful of salad, for example, and half a cup of cooked veggies. So it's not a huge amount, but instead of worrying about cups and weighing and all that stuff, use plate as a visual to sort of make sure you're getting enough of these things. Another quarter of your plate would be, you know, carbohydrate. So carbohydrate, you could call it starch. Carb is important. I mean, I know that the latest trending stuff right now really has to do with gluten-free and no carbs and this and that, but carbohydrates, particularly complex carbohydrates, which would be your rice, potatoes, bread, pasta, cereal, is a really important fuel for our brain to work properly. So we want to make sure that we get some amount of carbohydrates. The bottom line is carbohydrates for a lot of us are comfort foods. So if you're super cranky and you come home or you skip lunch and you realize by the time you got home from work or from wherever, school, that you're starving, what's the first thing we go to? We go for quick and easy. So easy might be a slice of toast, a bowl of cereal, popcorn, chips, something like that. And what they all have in common, they tend to be complex carbohydrates. So it's really about managing those portions. The other plate would be a protein. So protein is really the nutrients that you're going to find in very rich amounts in meat, chicken, fish, eggs, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, soy products. So it's really about managing the portions of all of these things so that you get a nice variety of different foods on your plate, but that you're getting a nice, what I call a balanced plate. So you're getting enough of everything so you don't feel like any food's been taken away from you, but you get a nice balance so that you're not missing any real major nutrients. Then we've got milk and we've got fruit on the side, and that's just to sort of round out all those food groups. Right. Now, for healthy eating, if you want to sort of get back on track, healthy eating is really important. And I say to people, keeping a food journal is probably the one way you can make sure you stay on track for healthy eating. But a lot of people sort of roll their eyes and say to me, "Are you serious? I have to write it down. I mean, that's hard work." And I say, you know what? It is. It can be an onerous task, but keeping a food journal, the amount of scientific evidence to back up journaling and staying on track with healthy eating or weight loss or anything like that is really strong. And so we know that when you write it down, you're more accountable, you're honest with yourself, and might help you keep on track. You know what? All our mothers were right. You know, eating breakfast is important, and we know that people who tend to eat breakfast have healthier eating habits and to be able to stick to a certain routine of healthy eating and so on. If you want to make big changes to your healthy eating, I usually suggest to people small changes make a difference. If you can make small changes over time, it makes a much bigger difference. I've had people come to me and they tell me they're doing a massive overhaul of their diet because they've realized, you know, I want to make changes. I need to do this for my health, for my kids or my grandkids or whomever. And so, but typically when you make drastic changes to your eating habits, it ends poorly. I mean, it usually ends with people being unsuccessful with changing their diet or changing habits, whether it's eating or whether it's exercise or quitting smoking. You have to do small changes over a period of time, and then you'll be more successful. And I think also people need to realize that I'm really a believer that there's no good and bad foods, right? We know that there are foods that are better for us, that we want to include more often, but you want to eliminate foods completely from diet that you really enjoy that may fall in the less healthy scale. So you want to enjoy, you know, special meals or specialties without feeling guilty. So one of the things that I kind of live by is what I call the 80-20 rule. So like 80% of the time, do you know what? I want you to do a good job with eating healthy, making good choices, and so on. But, you know, 20% of the time, you're going to go to a wedding. You're going to go to a party. You'll go on vacation, and you will have less control over the food that's in front of you. And so you need to be able to enjoy that without feeling guilty. And then say, don't forget the fluids. Always remember, this is probably the one thing that falls by the wayside for most people I meet is the fluids, especially if you're active or if it's on a warm day or if you're having specific symptoms. You want to make sure that you're getting plenty of fluids so that you don't become dehydrated. All right. One of the most common things I hear is, well, healthy eating, I just don't have time to do it. And I, you know what, I can understand that. Healthy eating takes a certain amount of planning and effort. And so you do need to be cognizant of the planning that goes into it. But about taking a little bit of time to make maybe a shopping list based on, you know, some meals that you'd like to have for the week, and then plan those meals ahead of time as if you can. You know, in the fall, I like to maybe a weekend make a pot of soup and then freeze it in batches, and then at least I have a few meals as a go-to if it's a particularly busy night or if it's you know, a rush day or there's no food in the fridge, right? And so and also getting help. So if you're able to get help from your kids or from your family to prepare meals or to shop and plan out, that makes a big difference in making sure you have the time to do it. And then it's all about doing as much as you can in advance. And you know what, I'm realistic enough to realize that, there's some times where, convenience will win out, and that's okay. But trying to make the time to eat healthy can make a big difference. From a lot of people that it costs a lot to eat healthy. It can be expensive, but there's a few little tips that you can use to sort of, if you feel financially constrained or you're trying to keep to a budget, how you can eat healthy without sort of breaking the budget. Something I usually say to people is when you buy in season, it makes a big difference. Think of grapes. If you buy grapes in the dead of winter, sort of middle of December, it's going to cost you about $4 a pound. But then sort of later on into the summer, you'll find you can probably get them for maybe $2 a pound, which is a significant savings. So you can freeze extras of certain things if, foods that are on sale or that are more in season than others, maybe you can do that. And looking for canned goods or staples when they're on sale so that at least you have some things in the pantry as a go-to item. And I'll be honest, when the flyers come around on Thursday night, I'll flip through, see what's on sale, and try to plan a couple of meals based on maybe what's on sale. Expensive, and that's probably the biggest expense for a lot of people who are eating on a budget. So finding alternatives like beans and lentils can be a very affordable way to include good, healthy sources of protein instead of meat. The other community programs. So if you live in and around the Toronto area or surrounding areas, there's usually fresh food box programs. And across the country, there's farm to table programs that are probably popping up all over your community. So you might be able to get in touch with your public health department or your regional municipality to see if there are programs like this in your area where you can get particularly a good proportion of locally grown food or food from, local distributors that can significantly decrease sort of the monthly costs of buying fresh produce and so on. Where the presentation changes tack a little bit. And so we talked a lot about the healthy eating and how you can make great choices. But you're at a point in your journey where you're waiting for treatment, you've just started treatment, or you're currently actively in treatment, you may be considering or waiting for or experiencing what it's like when eating actually becomes less pleasurable, when eating becomes a chore. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the potential symptoms associated with some of these treatments and how you can manage some of them. Probably the most common side effects as a result of treatment is nausea and vomiting. Now, you'll start, if you don't already know, all fancy medical lingo that goes along with some of these symptoms. So vomiting, for example, is emesis, very fancy, but you'll hear about that more and more if you experience some of this. Now, nausea and vomiting vary greatly from person to person, and it really depends on your type of treatment, and it ranges from 0 to mild to severe, and the recommendations will depend a little bit about where you are on this spectrum. Now, nausea and vomiting, that may be related to cooking odors. And some people find other scents, not just cooking odors, also can be make the feelings of nausea worse, and that may be, strong perfumes or room sprays and so on. If related to cooking odors, using a microwave oven can decrease a lot of smell. If you're able to open windows when cooking, that can help. If someone else is cooking, maybe you could move to a different room or go for a very short walk so that you're not around while food is being prepared. And interestingly, when you fry food, there's more odor associated when you fry. So maybe avoiding frying foods can help minimize some of the odors from cooking as well. If you have nausea and vomiting as it relates to medications or specific treatments, we typically say small, frequent meals is probably one of the best ways to do it. So eat when you feel your best, but it doesn't have to be a large meal. Low-fat foods can also help. So make sure that your food isn't, as the pictures suggest, really high in fat and greasy. Because what happens is when you eat a meal or a low amount of food that's pretty high in fat, what it does is it causes delayed gastric emptying. And what that really means is that the food takes a long time to get from your stomach to intestines. And when that happens, you feel symptoms. The symptoms might feel that you feel more nausea, or you might feel bloated, or you have that feeling. I mean, even if you don't currently feel nauseous related to treatment, you probably all at some point in life had a very rich meal and know what it felt like afterwards. You didn't feel quite yourself. And so to minimize the feelings of nausea and vomiting, we want to sort of avoid sort of very high fat meals. Now we have, if it's a severe form of nausea and vomiting, or if you're actively receiving treatment and your physician has recommended medication, there are what we call antiemetic medications, and the ones that are supposed to help minimize nausea and help ideally prevent vomiting during treatment. So there's recommendations that say if you've been recommended to take these medications during treatment, but you don't have these symptoms, it may still be a benefit to keep taking the medications to help prevent them from coming. Another little piece of information is if you've just started treatment, for the first few days following treatment, because oftentimes it takes about 24 to 48 hours before you feel side effects, particularly from chemotherapy, for example, is to avoid eating your most favorite foods. And so you don't have an association of, unpleasant side effects with favorite foods, because those favorite foods may come in handy down the road if you need to find a real favorite food, go-to food. When you feel well enough, you want to have that favorite food as a go-to when you do feel a little bit better. So you want it associated with feelings of nausea and vomiting. Okay, now another symptom might be what we call early satiety. That means you feel full really quickly after eating. And so sometimes instead of eating one larger meal, we might consider having small, frequent meals. And then the meals, what we call, would be nutrient dense. That is, for a small amount of food, you want to kind of maximize the nutrients you get out of it. So an example of something that's not nutrient dense would be something like water and vegetables, right? They have nutrients in it, but they're not very high in calories. And so nutrient dense, what we're looking at is, say, like peanut butter on crackers or something like that, or a handful of nuts. Something like that would be more nutrient dense. To prevent fullness that happens really quickly, we also want to consider not drinking fluids with your meals and maybe have them in between meals. What fluids can do is they fill up your tummy rather quickly, and so then you feel too full before you've even gotten to the food part. So what I want to do is maybe separate those out a little bit and minimize that sort of very quick feeling of fullness. This seems probably contradictory to what I talked about earlier about high fiber foods, is if you're feeling full very quickly after eating, is you probably just want to minimize very high fiber foods. So very high fiber grains or raw veggies and lots of salad, because they do contain a fair amount of fiber. And we know fiber is filling, so it's not about switching to white bread forevermore, but maybe for a short period of time, it's something to consider just until these symptoms subside. Now, might experience something called mucositis, and probably the most common mucositis is oral mucositis, and we call those mouth sores. And mucositis, and you can tell from the itis part of the word, basically means there's some kind of irritation or inflammation. And the irritation happens in the lining of our digestive tract. It might cause pain. It sometimes can cause burning when you chew food or when you swallow food, but it can occur at any point between the mouth and the anus, but probably the most common is in the mouth. And that may result in changes in the color of your tongue or your lips or your gums. It may cause cracks or blisters, little ulcers or lesions in your mouth, and it can also affect changes in moisture. And so the changes in moisture come from less saliva being produced. And when that happens, often it puts you at risk for something like thrush. And thrush, also known as candidiasis, is a fungal infection, and a number of different treatments if you have been diagnosed with candidiasis, and that's typically these antifungal mouthwashes you can use, and sometimes even oral medications. So other things that you could consider. Recommendations, even to help prevent and minimize it, is to keep good oral hygiene, so brushing your teeth, gargling if you need to with salt water, those kinds of things can help. If your mouth is sore, I mean, you want to consider maybe softer foods, some with not too much fiber, things that aren't acidic, and things that aren't very hot. And I really mean temperature hot as opposed to spicy hot, but sometimes spicy foods can cause some problems in the mouth as well. And that's really so that you prevent any kind of burning, which would cause more lesions in an already sensitive mouth. Liquid, so we want to make sure that if you're eating less, you want to make sure you're getting enough liquids to drink, and that's primarily to prevent dehydration. But when you get enough drinks, enough liquids to drink, that is, it can help keep the mouth a little bit moister and prevent sort of that drying. And you can look at juices that are less acidic, and typically those would include things like nectars. It's really severe where you find your food intake is really poor and you're not able to eat or drink as much as you'd like. You can look at high-calorie, high-protein milkshakes or nutritional supplements. So you've probably heard of, you know, some brands like Boost and Ensure and other brands, and that's what we call nutritional supplements. So those are sort of scientifically formulated so that they contain an adequate amount of protein and nutrients and calories as a replacement for a food or a small meal. So those are potential options as well. Diarrhea is another potential side effect, and probably one of the most significant side effects from diarrhea is if it's not managed quickly or it's really severe, is you can become dehydrated fairly quickly. And that's where we say, you know, drinking small amounts of fluid throughout the day, depending on how you're feeling and what you're able to take in, is probably the best way to diarrhea and the dehydration associated with it. One thing we do say is to avoid excessive amounts of fruit juice, and that's because we know fruit juices contain a lot of something, it's a fruit sugar called fructose, and amounts of fructose can actually make diarrhea worse and exacerbate it. So you probably will have, you can have diluted fruit juice in small amounts, and that's usually okay, but very large amounts of fruit juices can make it worse. And oftentimes you'll see this in children who might want to drink a lot of fruit juice. Foods that are high in something called soluble fiber can sometimes help. Now, if you have an appetite and you feel like you're able to eat a little bit, foods that are very high in soluble fiber include things like sweet potatoes and apples, berries, oatmeal and oat bran, and legumes like dried beans and those lentils. They keep coming up, don't they, those lentils? So certainly you could, if you feel able to, include a little bit more soluble fiber to help with that. If the diet is severe or if you really have very, very little intake, all fluids are pretty important and can play a really important role in helping to manage. That might be like a sports drink. So you can do, you know, there's a variety of different sports drinks out there, and basically what makes them different from water is that they have some added sugar, a little bit of carbohydrate, and electrolytes. And electrolytes are really just a group of compounds like salt and potassium, things like that, that get depleted when you have a lot of fluid losses in your body. So diarrhea typically causes a lot of fluid losses, and if you're not able to replace them with food and regular drinks, then sports drinks or even specific oral hydration fluids, like there's a brand called Hydrolyte. Pedialyte is intended for children, and there's loads you can look at in the drugstore, but you can also, the World Health Organization also has their own kind of homemade recipe on their website on how you can make your own hydration fluid if you want. Now, something cultured taste, and so the medical term is dysgeusia, and basically it's when there's a change in taste from the usual for you. So that might make things taste bitter or metallic. Things, you hear people say it doesn't taste the same, or you have an aversion to certain tastes. In some people, they have a heightened taste for certain things, so they taste things like sweet much more heightened than they did before. Oftentimes, it affects your ability to eat a sufficient amount of different foods. And so some recommendations might be to avoid metal utensils. And so trying plastic utensils instead can sometimes minimize that sort of metallic-y taste. And if, for example, those nutritional supplements I talked about earlier, a lot of them came through in metal cans, and so if you pour from a metal can into a glass, sometimes that can make a big difference in changing the taste of it if you take it out of the metal. Some people have an aversion to meat, and this is very common for a lot of people who are feeling a number of these symptoms, and that is look for other high protein foods if you have an aversion to meat. And so other high protein foods would be like peanuts and nut butters, well-cooked eggs, cheese, poultry, and soy, meat substitutes, things like that. And find ones that you like, find ones that agree with you, and trying to include them more regularly so you can get a little more protein in your diet when you feel better. I sort of alluded to sort of the dry mouth with decreased saliva production. The scientific name for it is xerostomia, and a number of different causes for dry mouth, and that might be related to the reduced saliva production that we talked about earlier. Maybe dehydration. Certain medications can certainly make dry mouth worse. And interestingly, as we get older, it's common to have dry mouth related to aging, and that's usually because our sensation for thirst decreases as we get older, and so we don't have the same sort of signal saying time to have some fluids so that you don't get dehydrated. Now, for people who have very severe cases of dry mouth, you can find artificial salivas and mouth moisturizers out there. My understanding from what I've heard from different people that these can be short-lived in that they can give you a very quick feeling of moisture back in the mouth again, but they're generally not long-lived solutions. Sugar-free gums and sour candies, sugar-free ones as well, can help stimulate a little bit of saliva, and so that may help. And then so sort of the small sips of fluid throughout the day can probably, just like having a little cup next to, keep a cup next to your bed or next to a chair or in the car and things like that, with maybe a little straw, can sometimes help people remember to keep sipping throughout the day. And that can sometimes minimize that feeling of dry mouth. And lack of appetite. So lack of appetite is referred to as anorexia. And so you've probably heard of anorexia before as an eating disorder. And so this isn't an eating disorder. So the eating disorder's official name is anorexia nervosa. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you have a low appetite or a lack of appetite. As a result, it impacts a reduced amount of food that you take in. And this can cause fatigue, it can cause weight loss, it can impact your immune function. And so sometimes what we try to do is, if it comes and goes, where you get a little more appetite back some days than others, is you want to try to maximize your intake when appetite is most normal. It probably won't feel the way it did earlier for a while, but try to look for the good days and maximize what you can on the better days than others. Eating in a pleasant environment can make a big difference. I mean, searching yourself on the end of a stool in front of a TV is probably less pleasant, and trying to maybe eat with people can make it a little bit more pleasant as well. We use smaller, more frequent meals, and this is something that you'll see is across of a lot of these symptoms in that it's less overwhelming when you have a small kind of a mini meal or a big snack, if you could, when you have smaller, more frequent meals, and then you can kind of maximize, those nutrient-dense foods often throughout the day, and then it seems a little less overwhelming than if someone were to put a big old plate of spaghetti in front of you. I mean, that would, if you're not feeling like eating, it's very overwhelming. You're probably not likely to eat much of anything. This is where you want to keep your favorite foods available, and you want to separate them from the feelings of nausea or other symptoms that may make you turn up your nose to them. And so keeping your favorite foods available. So if it's in the house, you're with them, that makes it easier, more accessible when you do feel like eating. And sometimes for some people, it can cause a small comfort sometimes when you feel like you can eat a favorite food again, even if it's just a small amount of it, it can bring a little bit of pleasure in an otherwise difficult situation. This is something that I realize is probably not appropriate for everyone. It may not be realistic for a lot of people, but if you feel up to exercise at all, it can stimulate appetite. Even if it's just a short little walk, even getting outside can make a little bit of difference in your appetite. In some cases, there are some medications that may be recommended by your physician to help stimulate appetite if you're really having a difficult time. And the next point I say with much trepidation in that a very small amount of alcohol, and this is only on the advice of your physician, can sometimes help stimulate appetite. But I stress only on the advice of your physician, because obviously alcohol can interact with a lot of different medications and treatments, and so you need to make sure that before you decide to imbibe, that this is something that you get the all clear for from your medical professionals. Now, a small amount of alcohol generally means one drink. One drink is equivalent to 5 ounces of wine, a bottle of beer, or 1.5 ounces of liquor. So certainly to think about, but definitely use with caution. Some doing some relaxation exercises before eating can make it a little bit more pleasurable. And so doing relaxation breathing, or maybe a short little meditation session of sort of a few minutes can sometimes help calm you down, help make you feel a little bit more for considering eating and so on. And then again, of course, we've got nutritional supplements. You can get them in the form of drinks and sort of high calorie puddings, other things that can give you a little bit more nutrition and calories and protein in a small amount of food that may feel more able to do instead of trying to eat or prepare food. So, I mean, if you want to try to eat better, I mean, listen to your body's hunger cues. I mean, planning ahead can make a big difference. So well-planned meals tend to be healthier. They take less time than takeout or fast food. But all of these, I think, recommendations are a lot easier and a lot more interesting and enjoyable when you do it with family and when you do it with friends. I don't know what days feel better for you to do things like this, but taking the time to eat, saving your food can make a big difference. When you feel well enough to eat and whether you're managing certain symptoms. But really, it's all about doing your best. Do your best to try to eat at regular times and choose foods that taste good to you, that give you some pleasure. And it's really about eating well and enjoying yourself while you're doing it. Different resources that you can look to if you want to have a little bit more information about some things we talked about. If you're currently undergoing treatment, I'm certainly talking to your clinics, your dietitian for more specific information to your individual situation is something I highly recommend everyone to do. You can actually go to Health Canada's website and you can create your own Canada's food guide. So if you hate broccoli, you can't stand the sight of broccoli on your food guide, you can actually make it so that your food guide doesn't have broccoli on it. So you have some options there. And then obviously we want to direct you Lymphoma Canada's resources. The Canadian Cancer Society also has some specific nutrition and fitness information. The National Cancer Institute in the United States is also a wealth of information as well. But then here in Ontario, it's accessible to anyone in Canada, is Eat Right Ontario. They have some articles on nutrition and cancer and dispelling some of the myths out there, which we didn't have time to cover in today's webinar, but I'm sure some people may have some interest in some information about that. But so this link takes you to some of their articles about busting some of the myths that you may have read about, like artificial sweeteners and so on. So I've got that link there if you have more information about that. We needed to end with a little laugh, and so this telling his grandson, I had a wild and reckless youth. I ate gluten and peanuts without wearing a helmet or sunblock. So I thought that seemed kind of appropriate for today to sort of share, some of the things that we need to look at when you want to eat healthy. You want to look for a variety of different things, and sometimes you need to do it without a helmet. I just want to thank everyone. It's been great, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer your questions. Yeah.
Samantha, that was so interesting. I particularly enjoyed, found very informative the relationship you made between food and psychology, and doing things like keeping your favorite foods for maybe later in your journey when you're feeling less like eating, and just making small changes like eating at the table with people you love. I thought that was really interesting. So I'm going to turn it back to our attendees. Does anyone have any questions for Samantha? Or speak up, or Samantha told you everything you needed to know. I know. So
I just covered everything. That's great. One thing I didn't cover that is something that I should just very quickly talk to is food safety as it relates to people actively undergoing treatment. And
oh, yes, please.
It's one of those really, really important topics. When you have a compromised or weakened immune system, you need to be extra careful when it comes to cooking certain foods or including certain foods in your diet. So make sure that meat, poultry, fish, shellfish, eggs are cooked thoroughly. Avoiding raw fish like sushi, for example. Seeds like alfalfa can be a source of potential hazards. Pasteurized foods like unpasteurized milk or cider or unpasteurized juice. So probably the only additional thing that I would say would be for people undergoing treatment at the moment. That would be probably the one last thing I would just mention.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Samantha? Well, thank you so much for your time today, Samantha. It was so interesting and important, not just for lymphoma and cancer patients, but everyone who's trying to manage a healthy lifestyle. So I really wanted to thank you for your time today, and I hope that people will join us for the next webinar.
Very much.
Thank you, Samantha. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.